If anyone wants to sing, you are more than welcome.
Michaela, are you there?
Yes.
How about an Ah Hey song? You and Mike. Come on. Get Mike. I thought I saw Mike on too.
I'm definitely a backup singer.
With Lisa,
Lisa and Mike do the Ah Hey. Come on. Ah Hey. Ooh, come on, Mike.
Oh, I'm on. I thought you were singing.
Hey, ah, hey,
Oh,
hey,
hey,
hey, yeah, hoo, hoo, hey, hey, yeah, hoo, hoo, hey.
oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, hey,
Oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, yeah, hoo, hoo, hey. We have the north and south coming together there.
Yeah, wait.
Way.
Snapping turtle drums.
should we get started? I know that Christy was hoping I could just go over some of the rules for the panelists before 4, so that we can just dive right in. I don't know if all the panelists have joined yet. It looks like we've got quite a few on already, so I think we're probably good to start to get started. So just for everyone to know, the attendees are automatically muted when you come in, and that's just out of professional courtesy to the panelists, just so that we don't have any kind of background noise while they're presenting. And a note for the panelists that everyone will be able to see your video unless you go in and turn it off. And everyone will also be able to hear you unless you mute yourself. So please, if you're not presenting, go ahead and mute yourself, and then remember to unmute yourself when it is your time to speak. So in terms of the time, we are going to be, today and tomorrow, we're going to have to be really strict with the time because we don't have any extra room. So I will be, with the help of Veronica and Christy, chatting folks when you have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and 1 minute left. If you're doing a really short presentation, I probably won't chat you at 5 minutes, but please make sure that you have your chat up so that while you're talking, you can see when one of us is letting you know how much time you have left. And if we get down to the point where you have 0 minutes left, I'm gonna verbally interrupt you, and I apologize in advance for doing so, but we just have to move super quickly through the agenda so that the people who are closer to the end of the day don't get left with 0 time. So just so you know ahead of time, I really don't want to interrupt you, but I will have to if we are running out of time. And I think that's all. And it's just, all to be respectful to the other panelists. We want to make sure that that's the key thing that we're doing. So I think we're about ready to start. I can pass it off to Cheryl if you want to get going.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. And Ganesh Chish, thank you for coming to our meet and greet as we get started on our Colloquium 2020. And it's just an honor and a privilege to have you here because we miss you. We miss seeing your beautiful faces. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming. As in most of our Indigenous meetings and gatherings, we start with prayer. So we're going to start with prayer, and then we'll have some introductions, and then the viewing and some opening remarks, and then the viewing, and then closing statements. And so if you could bow your head in prayer, please. Thank you. Our Dikian Ka'u, the one most high, Ganesh Chish, for your gifts, especially the gift of peace during this time of the pandemic. We come to you for guidance. We come to you to help us keep our children and our families, our elders in our community at the heart of your sacred circle. We give you thanks for this beautiful day and for this gathering, and that you may guide us through and you may help those who are the presenters to give their best voice. We also pause for a moment for those who have walked into the forest. We honor their lives and we give thanks for their lives. So a moment of silence, a moment of peace. Our Dikian Ka'u, a special request for protection during this time, and that you help us with guidance for the next several days as we stand in your sacred circle. Please give us the protection, the guidance, and the love as you always have. Ganesh Chish Dikian Ka'u, amen. Thank you. Okay, so Yage, we're going to begin, and is Brett Shelton on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. I'll yield. And we have the basket. I'm passing the basket to Brett Shelton, attorney for NARF and part of the Indigenous Peacemaking Initiative.
Thanks, Cheryl. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending. And I've got a real simple task here this afternoon. All I have to do is introduce to you Judge Timothy Connors, or Tim Connors. It's a real honor for all of us who get to work with Tim. Tim's done an amazing job of respectfully incorporating peacemaking principles into a state court in Michigan. And if you haven't heard that story yet, you're in for a treat tomorrow for the most part, but you'll get a preview today as well. And Tim's just done a wonderful job. And although he's not native, he's proud of his Irish heritage, and he takes that kind of Irish tribalism, you might say, to heart, and he shares that with us. And he, as much as we share with him about our cultures, he shares with us as well. But most importantly, Tim is, like, to me, an exemplary ally. He uses any privilege that he might have at all to create a space for natives to come forward, and he makes sure that they come forward instead of him. And whenever potential allies ask me how they could be helpful, I just think of what Tim does and try to figure if there's a way that I can relay something that I've seen him do or benefit from him doing, and help them in that way. So here we have Tim Connors, judge at the Washtenaw County Court in Michigan, member of the NARF Peacemaking Advisory Committee, all around super guy. Tim, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Brett, and welcome everybody. And thank you so much for being part of this, as Cheryl and Brett were saying, in these challenging times, a time I think of maybe there's a kind of a cleansing happening in the world. And so I think we have a couple of Irish peacemakers actually joining the conference. And so in my language, I asked, what's the word for peacemaker in Irish? And it is Lenan Shiocana, Lenan Shiocana. And so I think going back to our language and to our honoring our ancestors and coming here together today and really trying to learn from decisions that have been made and in our world as human beings and how we treat our Mother Earth. The decisions that have been made, we need to learn from those decisions which have created harm or spread harm, and we need to relearn those decisions and those ways of teachings of how we can heal, so that when we leave, we have given what we have devoted our lives and given to the ones who follow. And so in a little bit tonight, we're going to see a film, and it's a good film about peacemaking. But the exciting part is our keynote speaker, Mike Petoskey's in it. So you get a little bit of a preview of his work. And then we've got these young warriors coming up, and they're going to lead the discussion. And the ones that we're trying to support and hold up, and on their shoulders will be all of our work. And they'll pass it on to the ones after us. So I thought of, we always try to open up our peacemaking sessions in gratitude and in a kind of a prayer. Obviously, it's in a state court, so we have to be careful of how we do that, but we do it, and we do it in our circles. And so the one I picked was actually the story of this. There's a book called Anam Cara, written by a great, really wonderful Irish poet who had worked with hospice. He had been a really great healer, and he walked on recently. But Cheryl Fairbanks told me about this book, and she said, "You got to read this book." So I read the book, and I called my dad, who was in Ireland at the time, and said, "Oh, Dad, I read this great book." And he said, "That's the book I gave you 20 years ago, and you haven't read it yet." And he said, "I better meet this Cheryl Fairbanks. She must have great power, and you listen to her, not your old father." But at the beginning of the book is a prayer for the beginning of the new year that he devoted. It was for his mother, and it talks about kind of the four directions and the power behind that. It's a blessing. And I thought of it. It's one of my favorites, but today was my mother's walk down, but today was her birthday. And he wrote this in honor of his mother. I thought, this is a good way to start. So here's how it goes. And this is something to hold for all of us. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the curl of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so, may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. And with that, I'll turn it over to our very great young warrior, Carson, and to talk about the film and lead the discussion. And it's just such an honor to be here with all of you, and I look forward to learning. We look forward to learning from each of you and sharing and just this good energy together. Thank you.
Halito, everyone. So Michaela and I will be leading the conversation today with a host of young Indigenous leaders. We're going to start with the Warrior Lawyers video. It's about 20 minutes long. It's specifically going to focus in on healing circles and peacemaking courts and how it strays or it differs from the adversarial system and how we can use these mechanisms in our own communities. So we're just going to start with the video, and then we're going to go into meeting our other young Indigenous leaders and starting off our conference with this talk. let me know if there's, one thing before we start. It's easier to watch the video if everybody turns their videos off. So if you can just turn your camera off, it makes it a little bit easier. Let me know if there's any problems.
We have our own wellness courts that are there to assist those people with issues, not to throw them into a jail or to do something of that sort, but try to heal them within.
Our Healing to Wellness Court focuses on healing the individual, and it deeply incorporates culture. Native people respond more to programs that address their substance abuse issues from a cultural perspective. It's 18 months with a 6-month mandatory aftercare program.
Local courts, the county courts, they'll ask the tribal citizen if they would like to participate in the tribal drug court program. We accept any federally recognized tribal citizen. We accept non-violent offenders, same as with any court across the country.
People have to volunteer. So we don't accept people that don't agree to be there. They have to know what they're getting into, and they have to be at a point where they're ready to change their lives. The program is incredibly intense, and it takes a great deal of sacrifice, not just on their parts, but their families as well. But it's that level of regimen that they need to get on the right path.
One of the advantages to our tribal court is that we have all of the tribal programs at our disposal to help them. Housing, utilities assistance, medical care, education, substance abuse program.
How was the holiday? It was okay. Where's the line between privacy and secrecy? Because addiction is in the realm of secrecy. So you have to ask yourself, am I being private here, or am I feeding my addiction? You're going to have to let go and let us in. You're going to have to be open and honest about what's going on with you so that we can be there for you.
They have the normal probation requirements. They report weekly. The decision for the sentencing or for the hearing is based on everyone's input.
Really, it's a holistic justice concept in terms of bringing in people who, from tribal staff, who could be part of the solution.
They come to us broken, misguided, lost, and that shows in their spirit. That shows in the way they speak to others, the way they treat others, the way they think of the drug court. And after they're introduced to the culture, especially the sweat lodge, that changes. This way of life restores us to what we once were, what we always were.
One of the things that we have in our courtroom is the 7 grandfathers, sometimes referred to as the 7 teachings.
The ones that I was taught by my elders is love, respect, honesty, humility, truth, wisdom, and bravery. When they complete this program successfully, all of those 7 values are a part of their life. Each participant, when they first come into the courtroom, they're provided a poster. On this poster is a diagram of the Madison wheel. In that first phase, on the rim of that medicine wheel is a representation of a fire. And in the beginning, it's a small fire. And at the end, when they graduate the program, it's a full-blown fire. What that represents for this person in that program is that as they progress through this program, they're lighting their own fire within. And that fire within is what drives their spirit, what motivates their spirit to do right, to do the right thing, and to live the right way.
You don't just change their life. You change the life of their children, and of all the people around them, and you change the course of their family tree.
But I had some very early lessons after I assumed the bench that have kind of guided my career and my thoughts ever since. One of those was a young man from the tribal community who came into court one day and said, "Damn, this looks like a white man's court." Well, that set me on a career journey to think about what tribal courts ought to look like and who they ought to reflect who we are as Indian people.
Peacemaking in our community is using mediation with culture and tradition to resolve disputes. It allows the parties to come together, to sit down together, to talk, to express anger, frustration, to get to the issue of what caused the conflict, and then allow them to be able to then resolve it.
People are told that ahead of time, you know, that you're being offered this as an alternative to going through a court hearing. And you have to understand that if you don't participate in this fully, and if you don't work in good faith towards a solution within the circle, it will go back to the court.
You know, at times it's more difficult to do that, to change and to understand why you're there. In court, your attorneys are speaking for you. They are speaking to the judge. It's the judge that is going to hand down the solution to the conflict. A lot of times you don't even get to what the real conflict is because the law just allows that you're being charged. A lot of times the parties don't even get to meet or talk to one another. They don't get to express what feelings or emotions that they had during this conflict, and there's a winner and loser.
We're not focused on winning and losing. We're focused on healing. The goal here is sacred justice. It's what Judge Petoskey calls sacred justice. These people are going to have to interact within the community, not just for years to come, but their families for generations to come. And if you allow them to come to court and leave with this huge rift between them, it's a disservice to the community at large.
I think one of the major differences between tribal courts and state courts is that tribal communities are small, they're close-knit, so we don't leave and not know who the clients are that are coming through the court system.
The adversarial model in destroying those kind of relationships really sends reverberations throughout the community.
Disproportionately, students across the United States, students of color, poor students, and disabled students are disciplined at a higher rate. And what we also know is that very often when a student is suspended from school, that sort of leads them down a path where they touch the criminal justice system.
And we also seen that our young people got into the court system and never got out. You know, we've seen where young people, where they're maybe teenagers or even, you know, younger, get into the court system, stay in the court system, even into adulthood. And so we wanted to change that.
We have, for some reason, have become a very punitive society. We want to punish people for everything. And the age range for that is getting lower and lower. Our ability to become empathetic has a lot to do with understanding how my behavior impacted another person. So if we take that away from children, why are we surprised that they fall into this path of behavior that leads them to the criminal justice system?
Giving people who might have violated the community standards an opportunity to make amends and to be forgiven and to be part of the justice system resolution in that regard is far superior.
When the Grand Traverse Band first implemented peacemaking into their court system, it began with juvenile cases and first-time offenders. But as peacemaking expanded, it went into other areas that included child support, child custody. For adults, it could be evictions, housing issues, or even interdepartmental issues between staff and employees.
Like for youth, there's a lot of times it's truancy. So part of it is when they come is to find out why are they truant. You know, what part is the parent playing a role as parent, and why aren't they getting to school, and how can we help them understand how to change their behavior.
One of the first cases that I remember was 2 young people that went back onto someone else's property and vandalized one of their outdoor buildings. The 2 young people that came in had to talk about what had happened. The other component of peacemaking is that they have to be able to take responsibility for what they did. And so the outcome in the case, they actually went over and helped fix it.
Peacemaking creates a safe environment for people to say things to be vulnerable. And it's difficult to be vulnerable in the courtroom.
Peacemaking is now being utilized in state courts.
That's really refreshing to see that, some of our native values are leaking into that system.
There's a lot of hope in peacemaking, and people are seeing that. I do think that's why it's spreading, is because people are understanding that there's hope there that there isn't in the regular criminal justice system.
I am a state court judge. I've been a state court judge since 1991 here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I was a civil litigator, so I was a trial lawyer. I was a lawyer who came to the bench as one who embraced and benefited from a strictly adversarial system that translated conflict into money. But the peacemaking court has been the product of really the generosity and sharing of a wiser view and worldview towards conflict.
We didn't know what peacemaking was until this judge says, let's give this a try. So I really give hats off, applaud him for doing that. He lays out these 2 paths. We can go the traditional route of litigation, and I'll do the job that judges do, or we can try this approach, this alternative approach that gives you the power to reach conclusions that will work for you and your family.
What happens at peacemaking is confidential. And they talk about that because it's hard for people to say certain things if they think it's going to be used against them.
For peacemaking, another big attribute that we're looking for are the parties willing to take responsibility and ownership for the behavior that they've had and their contribution to the dispute? Is there a sense of remorse? Do they really want to work it out?
And it's much different than normal mediation procedures are, for instance. You have to face your opponent. You don't get to go into closed rooms and talk to a lawyer and say you can tell them this, but you can't tell them that. Everything you say, your opponent hears. And the other thing that was interesting was that they had a system, which I think we should have in courts, which is that if you don't have the speaking tool, whatever that might be chosen to be, you can't talk.
We have no tables. We want no barriers. It creates a little vulnerability for everyone, but that's important to the process as well.
And when we talk about something, then we talk about it to learn from each other, to listen and to understand, as opposed to the time when now I am on the offensive to have my view dominate.
The facilitator comes in and we're all sitting in a circle and we begin by asking, what values do we want to bring? And we all write just on a piece of paper what value it is we want to bring to the circle. And so then we each go around and say what our value is. Often it'll be things like love or empathy, wisdom or humility, and explain why that value is important to that individual. And then that is placed in the center of the circle, and then the peacemaking begins. So the facilitator will start by saying, what are we here today for? And then each person will go around and say what their perception is of the problem. Why are we here today? And what is the solution? And then each person will say what the solution is. And then the negotiation starts. From there, each person can talk for as long as they need to about how they were affected, about what a agreeable solution will be. The goal is to come to a consensus among the participants.
But one particular case that stands out for us is a case where a large family became homeless, and due to a long list of issues related to poverty, the children went into care, which means they went into the foster care system. And we used peacemaking for about 15, 16 months to work with the family and all of the systems players, the caseworkers, the attorneys, and a number of professionals to really help that family get to a place of having housing and putting that family back together again. And what was really special about that case is the empowerment and the community support that this circle gave to the parents. When I look at the data of resolution, it's high 90s, and most important, the compliance to those agreements are high 90s. People who can craft their own solutions are more likely to do it. And they do it with pride.
Conflict come out of our inability to sort of go to our higher aspirational selves. And the law, a courtroom really should be those aspirational goals. What Lincoln said in his inaugural address, we should go to our higher angels.
Tribes and communities have always been subject to the law from the very beginning, through treaty rights, through the various laws that allowed us to become citizens, that allowed us to practice our traditions and culture, but at the same time we also were prohibited from it. So it seemed that the law was very relevant to Indian people.
Every tribal leader I've met, people who work in tribal government, desperately want to be represented and to be counseled by Indian lawyers.
The more Indian people who work in Indian country but then can cross over into that Western world and advocate for Indian country from a place that comes, from here rather than here, or both. I think we'll see many, many more successes.
This is what ultimately these warrior lawyers can be about.
There's still a lot of healing that needs to take place with our people. That's what makes me passionate. The history. When I think about my grandmother and grandfather, they weren't even American citizens when they were born.
What ICWA really is the gold standard for child welfare law, period. It's what all of our children deserve.
The idea of the gold standard really goes to the heart of the worldview of peacemaking and the Native worldview, and the idea that we are all connected.
I hope that more state judges are become open to the ideal of this, at least to give it a chance to explore it.
In our language, there's a word, Bikinawabi, and it means we learn through observation. If we can see someone living a good life in our community, we'll want to live that way also.
Quite often, Native people will talk about preparing for the 7th generation to come. Like the work that we're doing today is based upon the work that our ancestors did to put us where we are today. And I'll tell you, as a Native person, I am very excited. I wish I could look back 50 years from now or 60 years from now and see what each of the tribal communities might look like, given we're in an era of self-determination and able to make some decisions about our destiny for ourselves. And given that some of us have the economic power through successful economic enterprises to carry out and those plans and to implement them.
We're a proud people, and we're determined not to be extinguished, and we're determined to be a good example and to grow here within our nation and not be just a part of history.
I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to watch this piece with us and just really, reflecting upon the things that have been said by these peacemakers and by these people who are really leading the Peacemaking and Healing Circle movement. So from here, I'd like to turn it over to Michaela as we start into our Peacemaking Circle.
Hello, I will briefly introduce myself. Michaela Yuchat Duasauk, Yeshayahat, Takwanadina Hatsati, Hinya Kwanda Hayahat. Hello, my name is Michaela Demmert. I am Raven Bullhead from Klawak on Prince of Wales Island. I'm happy to be here to co-facilitate with Carson, and we are excited to kind of have some discussion with some powerful young leaders we have invited. And so we're gonna kick off that discussion, but before we jump right into the circle, I wanna give Carson the chance to also introduce herself as the other co-facilitator.
Helito, Sauchifiat Carson, Chatasia. Hello, my name is Carson. I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I'm currently living in the United Kingdom at the moment. So if you see, well, I've covered the blinds so you don't know how dark it is outside. But I'm really blessed to be able to be here with all of you today, and I feel extremely blessed to be here as a co-facilitator with Michaela.
And so we have some questions in our circle, and watching that, I'll post the talking order, but for our circle, we'll have myself, Carson, Michaela M, Karen, Rohan, Casey, and Sheldon. So I think I see most of your names here on the panelists list. But for folks, I'm going to post the talking order. That way we can kind of keep that circle feeling going, and we'll jump right in. So let me just copy and paste that real quick. And cool. Got that. Okay. So we first wanted to begin by introducing this circle, and for introductions, we wanted to do name, tribal affiliation, school or work you're into, and then something you don't know about me, or something no one knows about you.
Carson, do you want to take over?
Okay, I wasn't just sure if it was on my screen. Thank you, Katrina. So I guess I'll briefly start with saying, hi, I'm Carson. I'm Choctaw. I'm currently finishing a master's program in socio-legal studies at the University of Oxford, which is why I'm living in the UK and she'll further notice. And something you don't know about me. When I was like 10 years old, I avidly collected really cool coffee mugs. So I would just travel around and collect coffee mugs, and my parents thought it was really weird, but supported me nonetheless. So that's I guess my one fun fact. Don't hold it against me. So the next person in the order would be Michaela M.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Michaela Madrid. I'm an enrolled member of the Lower Brule Lakota Sioux Tribe. So I was born and raised in South Dakota, but I'm currently living in Portland, Oregon. I actually just completed my master's in public policy from Portland State University. So my emphasis was in intergovernmental relations with tribal governments. And I currently work at the Sovereign Bodies Institute. I'm the operations manager there, and we do research and direct services on missing and murdered Indigenous women. So something that people don't know about me, I guess I got my name in kind of a funny way. So when my mom was pregnant with me, the ultrasound said I was going to be a boy. So I was supposed to be Michael. And so I came out and surprised them and was a girl. So they put an A at the end, and thus came Michaela. So also, side note, I was super excited to see there's another Michaela on this list. I don't often see people spelling it the same way. So excited there. But just grateful to be with you all today.
Carson, Michaela, you're muted.
Michaela D, would you like to introduce yourself, or what you're doing and what program you're going to be in, and a fun fact about yourself?
Sure thing. Can you hear me good?
I can hear you, but you're a little slow, so you might want to turn off your video. Yeah, that might be better. I can't hear you right now. I don't know if anyone else can.
Okay. Is this better?
There's probably video problems in Juneau, so maybe go to the next person, Carson.
That sounds good. That sounds good. I don't see Karen. So Karen, if you are here, send me a message. But maybe Rohan will go on to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rohan Hyatt. I'm not affiliated with any tribe, so I'm coming at this from the perspective of an ally. And it's really wonderful to be able to hear from all these peacemakers, to learn from you all. I'm a baby law student at Lewis and Clark Law School, and I currently work as a law clerk at the Federal Public Defenders. And I guess my aspiration, or well, one thing that you all don't know about me, and that might show up during this video call, is that I have a cat named Kiki. So if you see a little tail going across the screen, that's my cat.
And then can we go on? Oh yes, Casey, cool.
My name is Casey Duma. I am from the Pueblo of Laguna in Hopi Tewa from New Mexico and Arizona. Currently living in the White Mountains of Arizona right now. And I am an attorney. I am owner of Duma Law, work primarily with tribal governments, tribal courts, sit on appellate court there at the Chippewa Cree tribe. I've been an attorney for over 12 years now, and got my start off working in tribal courts as a prosecutor, juvenile prosecutor, and with attorney for social services. But it's a pleasure to be here with y'all. And one fact about me, that at one point in time, I used to be able to dunk, believe it or not. My kids don't believe me. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old. Yeah, so I tell the stories, but that we lived back in the day where there was no evidence, no video, no cell phone. So I think all we had was like the cameras that went over the phone. So somebody's got to verify my stories once, one of these days. Thank you.
Ready for me to go? All right. My name is Sheldon Spotted Elk. I'm Northern Cheyenne from Lame Deer, Montana originally. Grew up in Oklahoma and grew up in Utah, southern Utah for most of my life near the Navajo country. My profession right now is, law trained, used to represent kids in juvenile delinquency and child welfare. Haven't been inside a courtroom for 6 years. I feel really good about that. But I sit on a Court of Appeals recently. I just put me on a Court of Appeals, but I still haven't been in a courtroom since COVID. So one day that will start. Fun fact about me. I have 2 kids, 2 sons. And so they're a lot of fun in my life right now. They're at good ages too, 14 and 11. So they're the ages where they still hang out with dad. So that's a good age. So that's my fun fact. Thank you.
Michaela, is your audio working now? Michaela D.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, my name's Michaela. Funny story. I was supposed to be a boy too, I think. And I think the A also got added. So that could be my fun fact too. I'm Flinga. I work at Clinka and Haida Tribal Court and will be attending University of Washington to get my Master of Social Work in the fall. Yeah, so I'll pass my basket to Carson. Did Karen join us?
Karen is being added as a panelist right now. So maybe we could go on to the first question, and then when Karen's able to join us, they can also introduce themselves then.
Sounds good. So for our first question, we wanted to ask, what does it mean to move away from the adversarial system of justice? And so I will begin just to give a few thoughts. When I think of moving away from the adversarial system, I think of turning towards a more strength-based approach that allows for folks to grow and to look at their strengths on how to walk a better life, and to become more part of their community again. I think it offers more direct dialogue, as we saw in the video, taking away the tables and just the power dynamic of how a typical courtroom would look, just putting everyone in a circle and allowing for that connection to happen. I think it allows for more vulnerability and connection. And what I appreciate is the communal approach to thinking of solutions together rather than finger pointing or having a winner or loser. And it definitely constantly reminds me of, to be gentle on the person and tough on the issue at hand. So those were my initial thoughts, and I will pass my shell to Carson.
Thank you, Michaela. So I don't pretend to be an expert in this at all, especially since a lot of people here are actually in law school and I am in a master's program. But I guess, what really brought me to peacemaking and my interest in peacemaking was having seen how the adversarial system had torn communities apart, had torn apart families, had pulled away cousins, and how it just really attacked their lives, and not only attacked them, but their entire communities and everybody that was close to them, right? It ruined relationships. And I think peacemaking really offers us an opportunity to heal those relationships, to, as Michaela was saying, bringing people back into the center, folding communities back into these conflicts so that we can solve them together. And even more than that, you know, there are a lot of other forms of conflict resolution that claim to do this as well, right? Like community mediation and restorative justice. But I think what's specifically special about peacemaking or healing circles is that we are centering Indigenous communities when we're handling these conflicts. We're centering our values, we're centering our culture and our traditions and our medicines as we're trying to solve these conflicts and bringing that all into the way that we develop our resolution. Yeah, so I'll pass it over I don't have a basket with me, but I have a teacup, a very English teacup. So I'll give that to Michaela.
Thank you. So for me, what I really see the distinction, and I really like the way that the other Michaela said, you know, to be soft on the person, but tough on the issue. And so the way I see kind of the adversarial system is really telling the person, like, you're a bad person, you're a criminal. Society would be best if you were locked away and there's no chance for you to rehabilitate. But what the more peacemaking system does is it shows that you aren't a bad person. You grew up in a society because of systemic issues that has led you to believe that this is the only reality for you, that this is the only option that you have to make it in this world. And that's sad. So what we need to do is fix those societal conditions that led you to feel this way and led you to do these crimes. And so with peacemaking, it's much more about nurturing that strengths-based side and, you know, just showing people that, yeah, you might have made a mistake, but you're able to evolve and able to do better. And I think that's ultimately, I mean, we all are human beings, we're not perfect. And I think the peacemaking system really recognizes that and looks at ways that we can do better. One of my favorite quotes, not a cultural trope quote, but from Maya Angelou is, you know, we do the best we can until we know better. And then once we know better, we do better. And so I think that's a really amazing philosophy to live by and one that is really embodied by the peacemaking approach. So with that, I do have a shell, so I'll pass my shell off to Karen if she's here. Did she make it back? And if not, then we'll go to Rohan.
Oh, I'm sorry, I am here. Yat everybody, my name is Karen Francis. I'm Nakai Dene, born for Tuhaglini, and my maternal grandfather is Tapahe, and my paternal grandfather is Hanaakni. So I am from the Navajo Nation. I live in Winter Rock, Arizona. I work at the judicial branch of the Navajo Nation as the government relations officer. And I can't really think of a fun fact about me. I really like to sew a lot, and I've been doing that a lot during our curfew and lockdowns. So that's about the only thing I can think of right now. And I can pass it on to, is it Rohan? Is that what you were saying?
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so I've been thinking about this question, what does it mean to move away from the adversarial system of justice? And I think on a personal level, a lot of that for me has been learning how to decenter myself and center Indigenous voices through my representation, through my lawyering. I've only finished the first year of law school so far, but it's really interesting because law school is it's a place where you can't really be vulnerable. And I think the adversarial system is kind of inscribed in law students in these intro classes. Like, you go into class, and if you're wrong, that's like a bad thing. If you don't know the answer to the questions that you're called on randomly, that's a bad thing. And I know I've seen a lot of my, Indigenous friends, POC friends, who are so discouraged after coming to law school, and that's not what justice is, right? I remember one moment in my civil procedure class this year where our professor acknowledged the adversarial system of justice and how it kind of destroys relationships between people. And it was just something that she took for granted and we moved on. And so I think, moving away from the adversarial system of justice means having a more critical eye as law students and pushing back on these ideas and saying, well, why does it have to be like that? Or what are some other ways that we can think about to solve these problems, even in these classes that are very supposed to be rigid and they have a set schedule and everything. I think there's a lot of ways that us as law students can learn to move away from that and showcase our vulnerabilities and our cultures more in class. And I have a little dinosaur, so I'll pass that on to Casey.
Thank you. I think this question of the adversarial system and comparing it to our indigenous systems, one that we really have to go back to the very beginning of our existence as a people, and how, in looking at the importance of our dispute resolution systems, our indigenous systems, and seeing those truly as a gift of our Creator to help our peoples stay together, to help our families stay together, to help individuals find balance within themselves, so that when we move together as a people. So at the heart, our indigenous justice systems, our peacemaking systems, our indigenous restorative systems goes all the way to the beginning of our creation as a means of keeping our people together. And so as we transition through time and we've forcibly adopted Western judicial systems, which operate on a different set of values. So being very individualistic centered versus having a communal-based centered system. And so when we talk about our own indigenous systems, it's about preserving and maintaining the health and welfare of family and community. And so those cannot be separated from that process. Within that adversarial system, it's a cat and mouse game where you bring your side and I bring my side. And the goal is not to get to the truth to heal. The goal is to, one, I can catch you within the procedural aspect of it, and we won't even get to address the very heart of the issues. Or one, I may have done something wrong, but I'm gonna put the shield up of the system to protect me from ever being accountable for that. So if you look at in that system, it definitely, it does what it does best. It's the adversarial system does what it does best. But for our communities, for our people, for our culture, oftentimes those do not mesh together. And so when we rethink and when we look at our judicial systems, our tribal systems, or whether they're state court systems, we have to look at the value systems that uphold those systems. And when we talk about community and family, those are the things that reign supreme within our indigenous systems, about restoring that balance at its most center point. So when we think about the contrasting nature of an adversarial system, where it is isolating, where the individual goes through the system, and there's not family, there's not community often associated with those processes, oftentimes very discouraged, even when you talk about children, especially when you talk about children, juvenile delinquency proceedings, the family is isolated away from that process. So the heart and strength of family and community is often detached from the process. And so those are very critical when our people have been exposed to a Western system for so long. We begin to adopt the expectations of that system to where we are also becoming very individualistic simply by the systems that we have adopted. And so it's very concerning what will happen to our ability as a people to remain strong families, strong communities, if we continue in that manner, being centered solely on that Westernized system. We have to balance that out. We have to balance those approaches out, because our people are being conditioned for that type of expectation, to where the family and community, when you come to address situations, oftentimes when you're exposed to that system, you get this very eye for an eye mentality, where I want that person to suffer pain because they hurt me. And so it becomes this kind of distorted sense of justice, where healing takes a back burner, takes kind of the back seat. And so I think one of the things that is very important about our own indigenous systems is how focused they are on family and community healing. Thank you. And let's see what I got. I got some water here. I'm water cleansed, so I'll pass that to Sheldon.
Thank you, Casey. Beautifully put, Casey. That's really hard to follow. And I have this cool basket from the Mississippi Choctaw tribe. So I have this awesome basket that they gifted me. And so I have to reflect and just, I should have did this in my introductions actually, because I look at this screen here and I really was just fortunate to be born where I was born. And legally, I'm speaking, because I know Cheryl Fairbanks. I learned ICWA from her. I know Judge Petoskey. I've been able to sit down and talk to him about this work and watch him in action. I know Tim Connors. I've eaten some of his venison for hell's sakes, so I'm so privileged. And I know Judge Thorne actually, and I know these are some really powerful individuals that, and I know most of the people on here, but just the influence that they've had in my career. I do reflect on this, and Judge Thorne's he's rolling his eyes. I can't see him, but I'm sure he's rolling his eyes because I'm going to tell this story again. Because when I was a baby lawyer working for the Ute Indian Tribe, legal services, there it is. He's rolling. I'm tired of this story, Sheldon. So but I worked for legal services. I remember we had a 5-hour drive. I was on this state committee with him, and he's like, hey, do you want to ride home? And I was like, yeah, I rode down with somebody. So I rode shotgun with Judge Thorne, and he stopped and we went to McDonald's, and he ordered me a Big Mac, and he ordered me a Happy Meal actually. And I got to sit down and eat my Happy Meal and listen and ask him any questions I wanted. And this is a guy that sat at the intersection of tribal justice and state court justice for a long time. Of course, a state court appeals judge, but has worked on tribal benches for all this time. But he made this really good point, and I'm probably going to misquote it even, but just about the dynamics of tribal courts and the future of tribal courts, of how in search of validity in Western systems that are trying to become more Western, where I remember at the same time, Utah at this time was really the state of Utah was trying to push out this mediation idea, these ideas of restorative justice principles. And so they were following our tail, and we're trying to follow their tail. But the things that we do really good, and I like what has been said already, and I reflect on Cheyenne ceremony. We're a Sundance tribe, and some of the ideas around that as we search for justice. This idea of us all gathering here and having intention, which is the first thing that's requisite to have ceremony, is to have intention. And then us being cognizant of humanity and our relationship to the earth. And so I think those are things that are really present. As far as the practice of law and how that's relevant, I think maybe, I don't know, I've never done intellectual property, but I think maybe in those instances, there's a clear winner and a clear loser of who has a patent. But when we're dealing with children, we're dealing with family, there's a community investment and them winning. For humanity, we want them to win. And so the damage that's done by termination of parental rights, the civil death penalty, and child welfare, there's no justice in that. There's no justice. Nobody wins. We all lose. Actually, all of humanity loses when that happens. And so that's, I think, tribal systems. And where I've got to experience that is actually family group conferencing, which was outside of the court, but the court would adopt that. But giving the family the opportunity to solve that problem, which inherently, I know this has been said as well, I don't think lawyers, at least the education that we receive, is the opposite of that. Actually, the method I think, reflect on my 1L year, the method they taught us was to divorce the humanity of what's happening here. There's some really ugly things that are happening in this case, but look at the facts and marry them to the law. And you're trying to learn a principle here, and so you're trying to divorce humanity from your analysis, but you don't want that to manipulate your analysis. But us being able to have ceremony, and especially when we're talking about children, actually is ceremony. That's a sacred thing. Talking about family is ceremony. It's a sacred thing, and especially about healing. I like the comment that Judge Connors led off with, is just like, I think being a healer, all of us have that in us. Some of us have more of it, actually. Look on this call, there's a lot of us that have that a lot more than others. But us being able to be healers and create space for healing to occur, I feel like that's the mechanism of law. Law could also be really terribly ugly, as we all know, but us being able to use that and create space for healing to occur, that's really a beautiful thing, and the closest to justice is that we could get. Thank you. The basket back to Carson.
Oh, I'm just gonna gently nudge it back towards Michaela. Sorry.
Thank you. Those were beautiful words. And so before I shared our second question, I just saw Karen pop up on the screen, and she's supposed to be a part of our circle. And so Karen, if you hear me, I want to pass the shell to you to briefly introduce yourself, name, tribal affiliation, your school or work, and something we don't know about you.
Do you mean Carlin?
Oh, I think it says.
I think you mean Carlin. It's
Okay.
Carlin, yeah.
Okay, Carlin, my bad.
So, hi everyone. I thought this started at 4, so I apologize for showing up late. I go to Lewis and Clark.
That's what I had too.
Yeah. I go to Lewis and Clark in Portland, Oregon. I did summer classes just to experience different Indian law. Something you guys don't know about me is probably I played college sports for my undergrad. So I was like a 3-sport scholar, basketball, track, and cross country. So yeah, also fought fire a majority of my undergrad. So yeah, so I like to call myself like a recovering Western scientist because my undergrad was for forest resources. So.
Thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry I called you Karen. I saw a Karen and a Carlin. I got confused, but thank you for being here with us. And so going into our second question, we wanted to ask the circle, how can our tribes benefit from moving to a more culturally based approach? And I heard a lot of you kind of speak to this in regards to the last question, but I'll still pose the question if anything else comes to mind. When I think of this question of how our tribes or communities can benefit, I think about how this approach allows us to embrace our tribal values and customs or traditions, and it allows us to it allows space for folks to connect with their community or with their family and kind of get into the practice of, harvesting or, maybe being exposed to the language again. I think that culture can be very healing, and when you create that space for someone who is lost, it allows them to connect with their indigeneity or kind of to strengthen, their resiliency and who they are and their heritage. I think that when an individual connects with their community or wants to get back into those practices, it not only strengthens their ties with their nation or their heritage, but I think it also strengthens like self-efficacy or like self-esteem. And I think many of us know that those can be good things when we're trying to help folks get on a better path for themselves and their family. And I think another point about moving to a culturally based approach is that we remind folks that, you know, they're valuable members of our community regardless of the path they're on, and, you know, they're still part of our family. And I think there's a lot of power in that when turning towards this way. So I'll pass this to Carson, and thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to keep my response short, and because we only have about 25 minutes left, if each person could talk for 2 minutes or less, that would be really helpful so that we can get through maybe another question after this. But thank you so much for everybody's responses. I think, you know, something that I really saw when I saw the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma bringing peacemaking into our community, especially you know, a few years ago when they were starting to train peacemakers, it was really beautiful to see how elders and young people were really coming together to help lead peacemaking in our community. So, you know, as all these trainings were going on, I saw people from the community who were, you know, who had been teachers, who were retired teachers, who were coming back to help lead the youth in the community, as well as young people in their 20s who are coming to help lead the next generation of people because of, you know, maybe experiences that they had in their own life, and they wanted to help guide young people away from that. And at that same time, they also wanted to bring their own, you know, our culture and our traditions to the young people. And I really think, you know, not only just having this element of bringing culture in, but also having this respect for the people who came before us and the people who are coming after us, and really, you know, this solid connection between generations and peacemaking is really beneficial for the community as we think about, you know, as in the video, the next 7 generations. What does the future look like, building off of what those who came before provided for us? And so I really think that's something in peacemaking that, you know, you don't see in the adversarial system, you don't see anywhere else. With that, I'd like to pass my teacup over to Michaela.
Thank you. So to me, you know, thinking about how tribes would benefit from moving to a more culturally based approach, I really have to think back to like the Indian Reorganization Act, and how a lot of tribes were required to have these systems that modeled kind of Western European type of systems. And so as a result, there was this cultural mismatch between the individuals that these systems were set to serve and the systems themselves. And so I think, you know, we've tried to do it that way since the Indian Reorganization Act, and what we're showing is that it doesn't work. People don't always respond to these kind of colonial notions of justice. And so being able to bring it back to a more culturally based approach is really that step in decolonization, and is that step in, you know, what are our systems, what do we need them to look like to work for us, and being able to assert that self-sovereignty and self-determination to make those systems as we see fit. And I think it would also encourage a lot more tribal folks to go and become a lawyer. I know for me myself, I almost went to law school, and I was turned off from it because it was such an adversarial, competitive environment that I just knew that I don't thrive in those kind of scenarios. I don't feel good when I'm, you know, made to be in competition with other people. I'd rather to see us work together and to work collaboratively. So that's why I ended up going into my Master's of Public Policy, because it felt a little less adversarial. So yeah, I think we have, you know, all to gain from kind of reimagining our culture, or not reimagining our systems to fit the culture. So with that, I'll pass it to Karen. Not Carlin, Karen. I think we do have a Karen.
It's Carlin.
Yeah, there was a Karen who I passed it off to last time. She didn't have her video on. Or was that still you, Carlin? I'm sorry.
I don't know why this is. Is there a Karen?
There is a
That's
Karen as well, but she doesn't have her video on. So Carlin, why don't you go?
Okay. Similar to what everyone's saying, having a safer environment, I think, really would help tribal students and definitely within the law systems, and would help natives actually achieve maximum potential. And right now it's kind of like adapting the best you can in as many ways as you can, but taking off the ceiling definitely would help a lot of people feel good inside and have a better ability to really help community success. I guess as Native people, we never look at ourselves as individuals, and so I think it would help a lot of people just be happier and have a better quality of life in general.
I just want to jump in and say that we have about 20 minutes left. I know each panelist should have about 2 minutes to speak, but we might have to go a little faster than that at this point.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm not sure who goes after me. So,
should I wait for Karen or should I go ahead?
Maybe go ahead, Rowan.
Yeah.
Just a quick anecdote, kind of, I think you all have said a lot of perspectives that I used to go to University of Washington in Seattle, and kind of the reason that I'm here is I met one of my best friends, Keith, who's a member of the Colville Reservation in Colville Confederated Tribes in Eastern Washington. And he kind of brought this like culturally based approach to our friendship. And I mean, the reason that I'm here now was sitting with him and listening to his stories of his upbringing, his family, and him just kind of describing his experiences to me and giving me that cultural perspective that I never really had. So I think, one of the ways that introducing a more cultural approach to our systems of justice can actually do a lot to create allies. I mean, it's literally the reason that I'm here right now was this one person that I met who I just sat with and learned from, and we bonded over that. And I think that's really another important aspect of this as well. I will pass the dinosaur to Casey, Casey.
Thank you. I think in this question, I think we really have to look at what does it mean to be a tribe, especially in these times. I think that idea has evolved a lot, and however, I think at its core, a tribe is made up of family and community, right? That community strength. And restorative justice and indigenous restorative justice and peacemaking empowers healthy families and then has an impact on healthy communities. And so when we look at the importance of our culture, our people respond better when it's put in those cultural terms. At least that's been my experience, because that knowledge speaks to them. It's theirs. It's their inheritance. That knowledge is something that's very important in their lives. So working with young people going through juvenile delinquency proceedings and going through that process, when you put it in terms of a cultural context and you frame our value system in that cultural context, it makes more sense. It's something they can identify because it's coming from their grandmother, their grandfather, their aunties, their uncles. It means more. And so we have our values, we talk about our core values and what those mean to the process. When we put together a peacemaking circle or a family circle, you're bringing individuals that may be able to contribute their knowledge of what a particular value is. And in doing so, they're framing it in the cultural context. It might be tied to a story, a song, or this just their past experience. But it really acknowledges the value of everybody that's a part of that process. And whether it's the uncle that's been an alcoholic for most of his life, he's realized that in that time, they have a bit of truth to contribute to the healing of maybe a nephew or a niece. That the value of everybody, when you put them in that space, becomes very important towards that healing. And so when we think about what does it mean for the strength of a tribe, at its very core, that is how we heal. We use families to heal, whether if maybe it's not within our own parents, maybe it's not within our own immediate nuclear family, but there are people, because we come from a community, there are others. I grew up in Laguna Pueblo, and I have many people that I call mother, many people that I call father. And because of that type of family network, that family relationships, there are so many resources to draw from when it comes towards healing, come time to healing a situation. So I think when we don't utilize the strength of our families and communities, it can grow lax and eventually become non-relevant in the healing process. But the more we utilize it, the more we engage it, the more it becomes a centerpiece of our whole indigenous society, the way it has been always. And so that's why I feel it's so important for not only the healing, but also the identity of our people. And pass it on to Sheldon.
I'll share two quick anecdotes that I think I've witnessed, and maybe this should have been my secret that I shared at the very beginning, is that I'm a part-time Fed, actually. I work with the BIA Tribal Justice Support, and so they're the mechanism that funds tribal courts. But since COVID, and so courts have shut down all over the country, state and tribal courts. And we've seen more of a willingness to engage in these ideas about healing communities. And I think the pandemic has kind of made systems really reflect on this. And so we do these Zoom listening sessions. We do these Zoom listening. I think at total I've done 29 of them. So somebody needs to give me a hug after that many of them. So and so yeah, we listen to all these. There's more of a willingness to do alternative approaches to justice, more about healing communities, more about less incarceration. Albeit there needs to be funding mechanisms to really support that on a broad level. And that's something that we're trying to impact. That's something I want to impact. And then the second anecdote, and I'll pass the basket, is that I get to work with state courts. I do some work with ICWA courts. There's 13 in the country. As further evidence that lawyers get in the way. One of the ICWA courts that have over 300 Indian children in their jurisdiction, since COVID, they started this project called the Stipulation Project. And they asked the question, why can't these kids go home? And the day that I talked to the judge, she said, I just signed 27 children to go home today. All parties stipulated to it. Where I feel like if we were in court, there'd have been different types of antics that these attorneys would have engaged in. But now that they're forced to sit down and solve problems and look out for humanity, and I think part of it is this pandemic, but I think part of it is, I think we're ready for a different approach. So I feel like tribes could benefit from that as well. State systems could benefit that. Everybody could benefit from that. So thank you. Passing it back to Carson.
Yeah, I'll gently nudge to Michaela again, sorry.
No worries. So we have one more question. We're being mindful of the time. We have roughly 10 minutes before our circle needs to come to a close. Carson and I will just skip to Michaela to kick off this next question. And so this last question is going to be, what are the ways that peacemaking can act as short-term and long-term solutions? And so just try to be brief with your answers, and we want to make sure to capture your voices. So I'm just going to pass it to Michaela.
No worries. Got the shell. So I think for me, really how this is a long-term solution is because it's looking at the root causes instead of the symptoms. And so we know because of a lot of policies that we have, high rates of addiction, domestic violence, a lot of these issues that weren't traditionally around before colonization. And so by the current criminal justice system really just tries to eliminate those symptoms and doesn't really look to address the root causes. So the only way to make sure that these issues stop and don't perpetuate is to address those root systems, to heal the entire person, and just to make them understand like why what they did was wrong and how to move forward. So that's my quick answer. Oh, and I pass it off to Carlin.
Thanks, Michaela. I would say the short-term peacemaking would definitely be the foundation of the tribe. And if there's a stronger foundation, everything else will run more efficiently. And I think in the long term, tribal self-governance and government would run far more smooth and definitely help with more social issues. I think a lot of social issues for families and stuff really inhibit the ability to make sure things are running smoothly. And I will pass it off to Rohan.
Thanks, Carlin. Yeah, I think in the short term, I'm kind of seeing ways that peacemaking can be implemented in the current system right now in subtle ways. With my work at the Federal Defenders, one of the things that the pandemic has allowed us to do is file these motions for compassionate release to get people out of prison for health reasons, for, to help them achieve healing and not face the consequences of the pandemic in prison. And, these motions focus on these people's stories, their health, their individualism, and it's not about an adversarial system, kind of process, even though it's in the adversarial system. So I think there are, new ways, and Sheldon put it really nicely, how the pandemic is kind of bringing these things to light, but our society is more ready now to move forward with these. It's called compassionate release, so more compassionate ways to deal with individuals in the system. And I'll pass it off to Casey.
Thank you. I think that peacemaking has the impact on that short term is to really, one, address the problem at hand, the situation at hand, by utilizing family and community. The long-term impact that it has is it strengthens our families, it strengthens our communities. And there are ways in which peacemaking and those peacemaking circles can exist. The most organic form it exists in is within our family, within our community setting. In our public communities, peacemaking is just a part of how we go through life. Something happens, you got in trouble, guess what? Your mom your dad probably called your grandma, your grandpa, your aunties and uncles, and all of a sudden you come home and all of a sudden there looks like an intervention. And they sit you down, they talk with you, they explain to you the importance of they remind you about those values. And that's the essential component. So we have to think about, as tribes, how do we take that organic process and incorporate it into our systems that we have that exist? How do we incorporate it into our court systems? Not only when it gets to the judge, but even before that, thinking about a juvenile delinquency proceeding, before it even goes before a court, where maybe a juvenile prosecutor or probation officer has the ability to determine if it goes forward or not. How about peacemaking there? How about peacemaking when it comes towards our judges, when they're looking at what type of dispositions they're going to establish? How about within our ICRA proceedings to help strengthen the family and community with their treatment plans that are done in that setting? So we're looking at how do we take this organic setting and put it into our systems that we have. If we know it's strong on this end, how do we bring it into these other aspects? How do we get into our school system so we can disrupt the school to prison pipeline? All of those things are on the table as far as how do we get peacemaking into the systems that we interface with daily? Because of what's happened is because we don't utilize it, because we've adopted so much of the Western systems and we engage so much in these Western systems that within a couple generations, we might not know about and how to do it. And that's the scary thing. The reality is, if we do not utilize our indigenous systems, within a couple generations, we may lose that knowledge of what it means to be a family, a community, to address situations. So thank you. And I'll pass it on to Sheldon.
Thank you. The short of it, I think in the broadest sense, I'll take a step back. I think in the broadest sense, if you're Indigenous and you're on this call, you're on this conference call, or you're an ally, is that there's a big need for truth and reconciliation. There's a big need of healing in our society, and we're seeing it boil over the top of the pot right now. And if it goes unanswered and there's all this pain that still exists in the years to come, it's not going to get any better. And I do feel like things have changed. Pandemics changed some things. George Floyd's changed some things. And so I think us being cognizant of that, and to be a healer, I think we need to heal. And you could look at this pain. You could go to any one of our tribal communities, actually. You can see the intergenerational pain that our relatives have, that we carry. And so us being aware of that, and I think that's paramountly where we're trying to get to, you know, no matter what your profession is, being a healer to our highest capabilities. Like I said, I know some of us on this call, I know Cheryl's on a different level than most of us. And some of you guys are on different levels than most of us. But to the best of my capacity to create space for that is beneficial to myself. It's beneficial to my community. It's beneficial to society. And so I think those are the mechanisms that we need to create. Also, there needs to be some sort of advocacy. And I'm seeing that now, like now that I get to be on this side of the fence, where funding mechanisms, as far as advocacy and report back to like how beneficial this is. And I think we're getting closer to track those numbers. So there is steady funding for this to help support. In the end, it's going to cost less money is really what it ends up being. And the highest cost on this really is our volition, us being willing to move forward and be goal-oriented and being able to create space for, just like this call, to create space for dialogue to happen is the biggest cost to us. So that's all I have. I'll go back to Michaela.
And that's Cheesh. Thank you. I want to quickly close out with some remarks from our circle, and I want to first thank you all for joining this space. I am honored to have this discussion with you all and just learn from each and every one of your perspectives. It gives me so much hope in terms of where we all want to take our communities, and I just really appreciate each and every one of you and the work you do and the education or career you're going for. So I want to begin with that and just note, you know, from our circle, I heard that this process of peacemaking not only heals individuals, but it helps us heal our communities and future generations. And that this helps us build our resiliency and creating better paths for the future generations. I appreciated hearing the comment about, you know, how can we implement more peacemaking into these Western systems, or how can we implement more of our indigenous systems into Western models and break things such as the school to prison pipeline. And I think that noting that it's important to utilize the knowledge we have from our elders and from our communities and our traditions and values. And so I'm recognizing the time and just want to say a huge thank you to you all again. And I think I pass it to I pass my shell back to the Connors for the official closing out, if Cheryl's correct looking. Yeah.
I'll take it. And Ganesh Cheesh, I'm holding this. This is a soapberry spoon. And those are the lovebirds, showing the relationship between the clans. And listening to all of you, I felt like we had our own university right here. And this was made by one of my cousins, but one of my other cousins would always say, you warmed my heart. And that's just how I feel. I feel like our cup is running over with your wisdom and just some of your remarks in terms of it's our values and our way of life that we're protecting, and we're investing in every single person. And I love what, I don't think he said it today, but Sheldon, he always says, we're agents of change. You bet, we're agents of change. And you all set such a beautiful foundation for tomorrow. And in closing, and we want to thank everyone for this meet and greet. And we debated about it. I'm really glad we went forward with it because it was very spontaneous. We made a big investment in our students because they're going to carry that torch forward for us, and the university presence, as well as the tribal leadership and our tribal citizens and allies. We're here, we're united. And that's very, very important, especially during these times. And so 3 things. I'm going to introduce our closing guest, and I wanted to thank the Connors for making the film available, because that film is going to Warrior Lawyers, and I think it's films like that that are really going to expand our thinking, and we're going to begin thinking in our own language. Not in American or English. We're going to begin thinking in our own language because we have the answers to the test with peacemaking. We have those answers. And so this film is going to be viewed in November on PBS. And so I wanted to say from the bottom of my heart to the Connors for being so open and sharing that film with us, so we were able to share it with our attendees. And so, in closing, and Michaela's going to do the prayer after Margaret Connors does closing remarks. And then hopefully Christy will put the agenda up for tomorrow. It's an ambitious agenda. It's jam-packed full. And so don't miss it. Don't even skip and come in and out. Stay for the whole day. The other is, oh, I know. If you want to stay after, it was so good to see everyone, just to say hi, because I miss you guys, and I've been home with Lowell. He's been so patient with me, but Ganesh Chish. And it's an honor and a privilege to really introduce my friend and confidant, Margaret Connors. And she and Tim, side by side, have carried this message of peace, and not just into the court system, but into the universities and internationally, as well as nationally. And I really think it's appropriate to have them open and close because of their closeness as a couple, and because they're our cousins and our allies. And we appreciate that. And I really appreciate the fact that being a prosecutor, I think it's challenging to make that shift to peacemaking. And the thing that I love most about Margaret is she wears these beautiful hats, and she's going to be teaching homeschooling her grandchildren. So Ganesh Chief, I yield to Margaret Connors, grandma, mother, wife, prosecutor, professor, and peacemaker. Ganesh Chief, Margaret.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm honored to be your friend. I would like to say, am I unmuted?
You're fine.
Okay,
You're
I'd like
unmuted.
to say that I really enjoyed the addition of the students and the mentors. Both the words and the sentiments I thought were just wonderful, very inspiring. I'd like to tell you a short story. I was raised in a very strict Catholic home, and I was educated grades 2 to 12 in Catholic school. And I was taught to never speak back to my parents, always jump when I was told to jump, follow the law in every possible way. And so when I went to law school, prosecution sort of seemed like a perfect fit for me. I was all about law and order. I'd been ingrained with law and order. And so I was thrilled in my naivete to be offered a position as an assistant prosecuting attorney in 1989, following a fairly good career in teaching. I, through the years, learned that in my quest to help victims and find people accountable, I was being damaged myself. And I was seeing that I was, by being a proponent of the harsh policies of my office, I was damaging others. And eventually, after about 18 and a half years, I retired. And because I found that the competition, the power and control in that position needed to be shifted, as Cheryl would say, into another way of doing business. We needed to have dialogue, we needed to have understanding, we needed to have healing, and those things weren't happening in the state court system, at least the one that I was in. So I retired, and I was troubled, I was distressed about the way that so many of my colleagues were enthusiastically administering a mean-spirited form of justice. And so I started taking a poll among not only my colleagues in my jurisdiction, but my colleagues outside of my jurisdiction to see what it was that drew them to prosecution. And it was wonderful to find that people like me only wanted to help. They only wanted to help victims. They wanted to hold people accountable, but they didn't go in it with a mean-spirited attitude of gaining power. And so I started to think about how the process changed people and made us all a little bit more hardened. I am very thrilled to say that last night we elected a new prosecutor in our county. And he is a young man who has seen all of the inequity. He has seen the injustices. He has met with community members throughout our county, and he has every intention of reforming our justice system in Washtenaw County. He is going to be bringing both restorative justice and peacemaking to our adversarial system. And we're really excited about it. Things will change. There's change in the air. Tim and I teach at U of M, not New Mexico. We teach at the University of Michigan Law School, and we teach both family law litigation and we teach peacemaking, different semesters. And one of the most interesting things, while we do a bit of each in each class so that students can see and assess what the difference might be in the way they feel about justice being handled. One of our law students said she was playing the role of a victim of a felonious assault. And after she experienced being on the witness stand as a victim in an adversarial courtroom, and when she had experienced then being a victim in a peacemaking circle and having to discuss ramifications and her feelings in that circle, she said, I definitely want to go forward with peacemaking. She said, when I was on the witness stand, the only thing I got to say were words in response to the questions that were being asked of me. When I was in the circle, I had my own voice. And I think there's a real beauty in that. We need to give people their voices. I did select a reading. Interestingly enough, Tim and I always go to the same things. I went first though. This is a poem by John O'Donohue, which Cheryl probably will recognize. It's called For a New Beginning, and I thought it might be appropriate for this colloquium. In out of the way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming. waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time, it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered, heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered, would you always live like this? Then delight when your courage kindled and out you stepped onto new ground, your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening, unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning that is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure, hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will be home in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you. Tomorrow there is quite a beautiful agenda, and because of my travels with Tim and those of you who are on this agenda, I'm very familiar with the wise people that all of us are going to hear from tomorrow and aware of the gifts that they're going to bring to us. I wish you all an influx of understanding, compassion, and serenity. And I thank you all very much for this opportunity and for the ability to take part in this. And to Michaela.
Beautiful. I think that should have been the closing. Thank you for that. So I will start with the closing prayer. Ganshish and Jaha'a, to our ancestors for bringing us together here today. We are thankful for each and everyone's presence and energy we bring. Please watch over our loved ones and keep our communities in your thoughts as we navigate these difficult times. Give the presenters and panelists strength in the mind, body, and spirit to share their good knowledge with us all tomorrow, and the attendees good energy to participate and learn more peacemaking. I pray we pave the way for the future generations and make the path wider and better. We ask the ancestors to watch over us. Thank you for loving us every day. Amen.
Good Ashish, and this brings us our meet and greet to an end, and we send our best wishes to everyone. This is the agenda, Christy, and we've had this beautiful team working on this agenda, and it's quite ambitious. And with the welcome by Mike Jackson and the Honorable Lisa Lang will be doing the prayer, and we'll have a panel of the purpose in peacemaking, and the keynote address is going to be Sacred Justice, a very different worldview by the Honorable Mike Potowski. And of course, we're going to have words of wisdom, and there's a big university presence, a student presence, words of wisdom from many peacemakers from different parts of the country and world. And our capstone is going to finish with the Honorable, I always call him Judge Thorne, William Thorne, and the Honorable Monica Zamora, who will be visionaries to take us into the future. And so we'll start at 9 o'clock Mountain, ladies and gentlemen. And so we'll see you, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm glad you're here, and we hope this is going to have a ripple effect. And safe travels. Be safe, be well, be sovereign. Love you guys.
Thank you all.
If you want.
Okay, I can't figure out.